Jesus Christ. Bought an abandoned house for $5, but no one knew it was for a widow. At 8:12 on a cold October morning, in the forgotten Appalachian town of Hope Springs, a stranger pushed open the creaking doors of the town hall. The place was quiet, too quiet for a Tuesday. Dust floated in the air like drifting snow. The clerk, Mrs. Harper, looked up from her paperwork just in time to see a man in worn jeans, a flannel shirt faded by sunlight, and work boots covered in mountain dust step inside. He didn't speak, didn't look around, didn't even take off his old baseball cap. He simply walked with the calmness of someone who already knew his purpose. From the porch of the general store across the street, old Mr. Dalton watched through the window. "Who's that fella?" he muttered. Beside him, young Caleb shrugged. "Outsider. Probably lost." But inside the town hall, the air shifted. The stranger approached the counter. "What's the price of the abandoned house on Willow Street?" His voice was soft, steady, almost too steady. Mrs. Harper froze. "You mean the Bat House?" He nodded once. She shuffled through the dusty property ledgers no one had opened in years. "Sir, that place has been condemned for 2 decades. Roofs fallen in, foundations cracked. People say it's cursed." A pause. "But if you really want it, it's listed at $5. Before she could blink, the man placed a crisp $5 bill on the counter. "I'll take it." He signed the deed with a name no one recognized. Then he turned, walked out, and headed down the road toward Willow Street, boots crunching on gravel, sunlight catching the edges of his calm, unhurried stride. Neighbors peeked through curtains as he passed. Who is he? What business does he have with that house? Is he crazy? That place is dangerous. But there was something different in the way he looked at the ruined property. Something steady, knowing, almost holy. He stepped over the broken gate as if crossing a threshold meant only for him. And the people of Hope Springs had no idea that within 3 weeks, that silent stranger would turn their small town upside down, nor that the House of Shadows was about to become a sanctuary built for a widow who thought God had forgotten her. Hope Springs sat tucked between the blue ridges of the Appalachian Mountains, a town so small and so forgotten that most maps stopped marking it years ago. 2 rows of weather-beaten houses lined the main road, along with a gas station that hadn't changed prices on its faded sign in over a decade. The coal mines had closed, jobs had vanished, and people had learned to survive on faith, stubbornness, and whatever the mountain seasons gave them. Everyone in town knew every family, every story, and every secret. That's why the stranger's purchase of the Willow Street house sent a ripple through the community. Because if there was one place in Hope Springs no one touched, no one entered, no one even walked past after sundown, it was that house. The old Henderson home, once painted white, now gray and peeling, had stood on the corner of Willow Street for nearly a century. It had been the pride of the Henderson family, a respected Christian family known for feeding hungry neighbors and repairing roofs after storms. But one icy winter night 20 years ago, tragedy struck. A car wreck took the last of the Hendersons, and the house went dark. No one returned. No one claimed it. And over time, people began whispering. Kids swore they heard footsteps inside even when the house was empty. Teenagers dared each other to get close, only to run when they heard what sounded like someone praying inside the broken walls. Hunters walking home after dusk said they saw a faint light in the upstairs bedroom, though the electricity had been cut off for years. The place earned its nickname, the Cursed Willow House. It wasn't just the rumors. Nature itself seemed to avoid the property. Grass wouldn't grow, birds wouldn't nest, and the wind always seemed colder near the old gate. The roof had collapsed inward, rain had eaten away the floors, and bats had claimed the attic as their kingdom. Even the bravest handymen in town shook their heads at it. Mrs. Miller once said, "Some houses are empty. That one feels watched." Pastor Henry never confirmed the stories, but he never dismissed them either. He simply said, "Some places ache for redemption." And so when the stranger walked straight through that gate without hesitation, the people of Hope Springs felt something unsettling, something they hadn't felt in years. A shift, as if the house had been waiting, and the right pair of hands had finally arrived. The stranger's presence on Willow Street became the town's newest mystery before the sun even set that same day. By noon, half the neighborhood had caught a glimpse of him moving with steady purpose, carrying nothing but an old canvas tool bag and a worn leather Bible tucked under his arm. No truck, no family, no past trailing behind him, just a quiet man who walked like he already belonged there, as if the broken house had called him by name. From her porch, Mrs. Dolores Miller watched him push open the sagging gate. "That man's not from around here," she told her sister on the phone. Her sister asked, "What's he look like?" "Like someone who's worked 1,000 lifetimes with his hands, but still sleeps peacefully at night." At the general store, Mr. Dalton retold what he saw at least 3 times that afternoon. He didn't bargain, didn't ask questions, just bought the place straight out. $5? Who does that? Caleb chimed in. "Maybe he's running from something." Dalton shook his head. "No. He walked in like he wasn't hiding from anything. More like he was on assignment." Once inside the ruined house, the man ran his fingertips along the rotted doorway as if reading a story written in the wood grain. He surveyed the collapsed roof, the shattered floors, the bat-haunted attic, and didn't flinch. Instead, he whispered something no one heard but the wind itself, then set his tool bag on the ground with the gentleness of a man preparing for sacred work. Later that evening, Pastor Henry caught sight of him walking out to the street, pausing as the church bells rang. There was something familiar about the way he looked up at the steeple like someone greeting an old friend. "I haven't seen eyes that peaceful in years," the pastor murmured. When the stranger introduced himself to the hardware shop owner, he simply said, "Name's Josh Carter," a name that meant nothing to anyone, and yet felt strangely weighty. Before long, whispers spread. The carpenter on Willow Street. The quiet man fixing the cursed house. The outsider who works like he answers to someone higher. Hope Springs didn't know it yet, but Josh Carter had not come to claim him a home. He had come to restore one, exactly as heaven intended. In the days that followed, the people of Hope Springs learned something surprising. Josh Carter didn't just work on the old Willow house. He transformed it. And he did it in ways that left even the most seasoned workers unsettled. At sunrise each morning, before the mist had even lifted from the foothills, Josh was already on site. He didn't bring power tools like most carpenters. No electric saws echoing across the valley. No generators. No ladders strapped to trucks. Just simple hand tools older than he was, by the look of them, and a quiet focus that made others stop and watch without realizing. One afternoon, local handyman Bill Cooper, a man who'd spent 40 years fixing roofs, wandered over, curiosity finally getting the better of him. Bill watched Josh cut a support beam by sight alone. No pencil marks, no tape measure, just a single glance and a clean, perfect cut. "That ain't possible," Bill muttered, stepping closer. Josh only smiled and set the beam in place. It fit like it had always belonged there. Later, Bill swore he saw faint scars round, sunken marks, right in the center of Josh's palms when he lifted a heavy plank. Old work injuries, he tried telling himself, but deep down, he wasn't so sure. By the end of the week, sections of the house looked like they'd been rebuilt by a full crew, not a single quiet man with a canvas tool bag. Floors leveled themselves under his hands, broken joists aligned with impossible precision. Even the bats that had plagued the attic for years abandoned the house overnight, as if driven out by something they couldn't challenge. Then came Sunday. Hope Springs Community Church was small, its wooden pews polished only by decades of devotion. When Josh walked in, every conversation in the sanctuary paused for a heartbeat. He sat at the very back, hands folded, eyes fixed on the cross at the front. Not with fear, not with guilt, but with a familiarity that made Pastor Henry's breath catch. During the sermon, a soft warmth seemed to fill the room, the kind that made people sit up straighter, listen deeper. After service, folks tried to greet him, but Josh slipped away quietly, vanishing down the steps before anyone could approach. Mrs. Miller whispered later, "He didn't come to be seen. He came because he already knows the one who watches." And for the first time in many years, Hope Springs wondered if Jesus Christ was closer to their town than they'd ever imagined. By the second week, the old Willow house no longer looked abandoned. It looked chosen. The walls were patched smooth, the windows cleaned, the doorway straightened as if the house itself were taking a deep breath after 20 years of silence. Folks passing by slowed their steps, not just out of curiosity but from something else, something like reverence. It was around this time that Mrs. Dolores Miller, carrying a basket of muffins for the pastor, paused outside the gate and called out, "Mr. Carter, mind if I ask you something?" Josh looked up from sanding a window frame, the late afternoon sun drawing a soft glow around him. "Are you fixing this place for yourself?" she asked gently. "Or for someone you're waiting on?" Josh hesitated, not out of fear but out of careful intention. He wiped the dust from his palms and leaned the sandpaper aside. "I'm fixing it," he said quietly, "for someone who needs it more than I do." Mrs. Miller tilted her head. "A relative? A friend?" Josh shook his head. "No, I don't know them yet." That's when she noticed something change in his expression. Not sorrow, not uncertainty, but a kind of peace that only comes from absolute trust. "Then how will you know who it's for?" she whispered. Josh glanced at the house, then back at her with eyes calm enough to still a storm. "God will show me." The words fell soft, but they settled deep enough that Mrs. Miller later told half the town. She felt a chill, the good kind, run straight through her bones. From that moment on, the rumor spread through Hope Springs like fire through dry grass. "He says God's gonna choose the person. He doesn't even know who he's building for." Who talks like that these days? Some folks scoffed. Others listened with their hearts instead of their ears. Pastor Henry, upon hearing the story, simply nodded. "Some people walk by sight. Others," he said, "walk by calling." And the strange thing was this. The more the house transformed, the stronger the feeling grew among the townspeople that someone broken, someone forgotten, was being drawn toward it. Only no one imagined that the person God would reveal was already wandering the edges of town, praying for a miracle she no longer believed would come. Far from Willow Street, on the opposite end of Hope Springs, a woman named Sarah Waters was living the kind of life that made people whisper prayers under their breath. Not out of pity, out of heartbreak. Just 2 years earlier, Sarah had been a wife, a homeowner, and a steady employee at the local diner. But after her husband died from a sudden illness, medical bills swept through her life like a storm she couldn't outrun. Insurance covered almost nothing. Savings disappeared in months. Then came the foreclosure notice taped to her front door. Quiet, cold, final. Her small blue house, once filled with laughter, slipped from her hands before she even understood what had happened. Now at 52, Sarah lived in an aging minivan behind the supermarket. She kept the windows cracked for air and slept curled beneath a threadbare blanket people had donated during last winter's church drive. It wasn't comfort she wanted, just safety. Or the illusion of it. Most mornings, she washed her face in the restroom sink at the gas station, tying her graying hair into a neat ponytail before heading out to ask for cleaning work. "Anything you need done?" she'd ask homeowners. "I can sweep, scrub, fold whatever you need." But doors closed gently, politely, and on bad days, not politely at all. Mrs. Jenkins, one of the kinder neighbors, once said, "That woman works harder than anyone, but people don't hire someone who looks like they haven't slept indoors." By week's end, Sarah's shoes were worn thin, her body shaking from exhaustion and a stomach that hadn't known a full meal in days. She clutched the only thing she had left from her husband, a small leather Bible with his handwriting on the inside cover. Jesus never forgets. That Friday morning, after being turned away from 3 houses and the laundromat, Sarah sank onto a bench in the town square. She tried to stay composed, but the weight of loss, hunger, and loneliness broke through. Tears slipped down her face silently at first, then faster, until she couldn't stop them. From the church steps, Pastor Henry saw her shoulders shaking and walked over. "Sarah," he said softly, "you're carrying more than anyone should bear alone." She wiped her eyes. I don't think God hears me anymore, Pastor." But Pastor Henry looked toward Willow Street, toward a house that had been waiting for her long before she knew it existed. "Sarah," he whispered, "I think he's been preparing something for you. Come, there's something you need to see." Pastor Henry walked beside Sarah in silence, guiding her down Willow Street as the autumn wind rustled the last of the orange leaves. She didn't understand where they were going or why the pastor's voice had trembled when he said, "There's something you need to see," but her feet followed anyway, half in faith, half in exhaustion. When they reached the corner, Sarah froze. The house. The old Henderson home, the cursed Willow house, didn't look cursed anymore. It looked healed. The sagging porch had been rebuilt, the windows replaced with clear glass that caught the sunlight, and fresh white paint brightened the weathered boards. A pot of yellow mums sat on the steps as if waiting for someone to come home. Who "Who did this?" she whispered. Pastor Henry nodded toward the door. "A man named Josh, a carpenter. No one knows much about him. He said God would show him who this house was for." Before Sarah could process those words, she noticed something. A small manila envelope taped carefully to the restored front door. The handwriting on it was elegant, deliberate. The words, "For the one Jesus sends." Her breath caught. Pastor Henry gently lifted the envelope and handed it to her. "It has your name and its meaning, Sarah. Open it." With shaking fingers, she peeled it open. Inside was a single brass key and a folded letter. The paper smelled faintly of cedar, like it had been written in a workshop rather than a home. She unfolded it slowly. The note read, "This house is fully paid for. No debt, no expectations. It belongs to you, the one Jesus Christ has seen in your tears and chosen for this home. When strength returns to your heart, pass this love forward. A servant of Christ." Sarah's knees gave out. The key slipped from her hand, clinking softly onto the porch like the final note of a hymn. She sobbed, not out of sadness, but out of overwhelming mercy. Mercy she hadn't expected. Mercy she didn't feel worthy of. Pastor Henry knelt beside her, voice trembling. "Sarah, Jesus didn't forget you. He sent someone to prepare this place just for you." Neighbors across the street watched from their porches, silent, humbled. No one spoke. No one could. Sarah picked up the key, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, "Thank you, Jesus. I'm home." And for the first time in years, the Willow House seemed to breathe. Sarah moved into the restored Willow House with the same reverence someone might feel stepping into a sanctuary. Every board, every window frame, every carefully placed piece of furniture carried the quiet signature of a man who had built it with purpose, not for beauty, but for healing. She slept the first night in soft sheets she hadn't owned in years, waking twice just to make sure it wasn't a dream. But blessings like this never stay contained. They overflow. Only a few weeks after settling in, Sarah noticed a teenager lingering near the church steps late one cold evening. His clothes were thin, his backpack torn, and his eyes carried the same haunted exhaustion Sarah once knew all too well. His name was Ethan, 16, drifting between couches when he could, sleeping outside when he couldn't. Folks in Hope Springs had seen him around, but it's easy for a hurting boy to become invisible when people are busy, tired, or unsure how to help. Sarah wasn't unsure. She approached him gently. "Ethan, have you eaten today?" He hesitated, expecting a scolding or a lecture. Instead, she offered him a warm sandwich she'd wrapped in foil. He devoured it in minutes, embarrassment flickering in his eyes. "You can come inside if you're cold," she added, "just to warm up." Ethan followed her to Willow House with cautious steps. When he crossed the doorway, he stopped, stunned by its warmth, its order, its peace. "You live here?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "Because someone helped me when I had nothing. Now it's my turn." Over the next days, she gave him meals, let him shower, washed his clothes, and made space for him to sleep in the attic bedroom. Slowly, Ethan's guard dropped. He began doing chores without being asked, fixing little things around the house, and even reading the Bible she'd set on the kitchen table. One night, while helping her wash dishes, he finally whispered, "Why are you doing all this? I'm no one." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "Because Jesus didn't forget me, and he hasn't forgotten you either." Ethan's eyes filled, not with tears, but with something far rarer for a boy who'd lived unloved, hope. And just like that, the miracle of Willow House shifted. It was no longer only a gift. It had become a seed, already beginning to multiply. News in a small town travels fast. But in Hope Springs, what happened at the Willow House spread with a different kind of momentum, quiet at first, like a whisper of wind through the pines, then growing into something no one could contain. It began with conversations in the aisles of the general store. "Did you hear about Sarah? She moved into that old place." "No. She was given the place. By some carpenter no one can find." And then the part that always made people lower their voices. He said Jesus told him who the house was for. By Thanksgiving, nearly everyone in Hope Springs had driven past Willow Street at least once to see the miracle with their own eyes. Some parked along the curb, staring at the freshly painted siding. Others prayed quietly from their cars. A few simply stood at the gate, as if waiting to feel what Sarah felt when she first held that key. But the story didn't break wide open until a journalist from Nashville, Rachel Collins, stopped in town while driving through the mountains. At the diner, she overheard Mrs. Miller excitedly recounting the miracle house built for the widow. Rachel's instincts kicked in. "Excuse me," she said, leaning across her booth. "Did you say miracle?" Mrs. Miller, never one to avoid a good story, told her everything. Josh Carter's sudden arrival, his impossible craftsmanship, the letter, the prayerful hush that fell over the town the day Sarah moved in. Rachel visited Sarah next. She expected a feel-good charity anecdote. Instead, she heard something deeper, something almost sacred. Sarah showed her the letter, the key, the house built with such care it felt like someone had studied her life and rebuilt her heart board by board. Rachel's article, titled "The Carpenter of Hope Springs," went live 2 days later. Within 24 hours, it had 50,000 shares. Within 72, news vans rolled into town, and within a week, the Willow House was no longer a local miracle. It was a national story. People drove from neighboring states just to stand outside the gate and pray. Others mailed letters, donations, Bibles, testimonies. Many wrote, "I needed this reminder that Jesus still moves today. Please tell Sarah she gave me hope." Is Josh Carter real? Or was he sent? No one had answers. But one thing everyone agreed on: the miracle of Willow Street had only just begun, and its impact was reaching farther than anyone in Hope Springs ever imagined. As the story of the Willow House spread beyond Hope Springs, something unexpected began to happen. People from across the country started calling the church, the town hall, even the diner's old landline. Not reporters, not skeptics, but ordinary men and women carrying memories that shook the town to its core. One call came from a retired school teacher in Kansas. "I don't want to sound strange," she said slowly, "but 30 years ago, after a tornado destroyed my home, a quiet carpenter rebuilt it, worked alone, never charged me. His name was Josh." Josh Carter. Another call arrived from a couple in Arkansas who survived a flood in the late 90 seconds. "The man who fixed our roof looked just like the one in the article," the husband said. "Calm eyes, gentle voice. Said he was just doing what the Lord told him. We never saw him again after that." Then came an email from a nursing home in Missouri with an attachment, a faded photograph from 1978. In it, a young carpenter stood smiling shyly beside a newly built porch. His clothes were different. His face looked younger. But the eyes, those unmistakably peaceful eyes, were the same. Residents gathered around the photo in stunned silence. "That's him," Pastor Henry whispered. "That's the same man who rebuilt the Willow House." Meanwhile, Mr. Dalton remembered something he hadn't said out loud. When he paid with that $5 bill, Dalton muttered, his hands, "I swear I saw old scars, round ones, like nail scars." He dismissed it at first, convincing himself he imagined it. Now he wasn't so sure. But the moment that truly shook Hope Springs happened when a soft-spoken woman named Elena Henderson, granddaughter of the original owners, arrived carrying her family's old Bible. Inside its cover was a handwritten note from her grandfather decades ago. "A carpenter will restore this house when the time is right. The Lord will send him." The handwriting matched the signature on the deed Josh Carter had signed down to every curve of every letter. People exchanged glances filled with awe, fear, wonder, and something deeper, a realization forming in the quiet corners of their hearts. Could a simple carpenter really appear across decades without aging? Could he rebuild homes, restore lives, and vanish without a trace? Could nail-shaped scars truly mark the center of his palms? For the first time, Hope Springs dared to speak what had only been whispered. What if it wasn't a carpenter at all? What if it was Jesus Christ himself, walking among us, building miracles with his own hands? In the months that followed the revelations surrounding the Willow House, Hope Springs transformed from a forgotten mountain town into the birthplace of something far larger than itself. What began with a single act of mercy grew into a movement, quiet at first, then gathering strength as hearts awakened across the country. It was Sarah who insisted that the miracle she received must never end with her. With Pastor Henry's guidance and the encouragement of neighbors who had witnessed every step of the story, a small group gathered in the church basement to dream and pray. From those humble beginnings came the Christ House of Hope Foundation, a mission dedicated to building homes for widows, orphans, veterans, and families who had lost everything. Donations from strangers poured in. Volunteers arrived from other states. Ethan, once a homeless teen on the church steps, became one of the first young leaders of the project, learning construction skills and teaching others. And through every new home they built, townspeople repeated the same truth. This all started because Jesus himself showed up in our town. Years passed, and Sarah, now older, gentler, and carrying wisdom carved by both suffering and grace, spent her days visiting build sites, praying with families, handing over keys the same way she once received hers. She always said the same words. This home was prepared in love. Pass it on when you can. When her health began to fade, the community surrounded her with the same compassion she had shown to so many. On a quiet spring afternoon, Sarah asked Ethan to wheel her back to the Willow House, the place where everything changed. The home was now a museum and prayer center, but that day the doors were closed, reserved only for her. Inside, she touched the walls Josh had restored, ran her hand along the window frame he had leveled perfectly, and stood in the room where she first cried tears of overwhelming grace. That night, she dreamed. She found herself in a vast golden meadow under a sky filled with light. Ahead, a man was building a home strong, perfect, timeless. He turned, and she recognized the eyes she had never forgotten. "Sarah," he said softly, "welcome home." She wept, not in sorrow, but in completeness. "Lord, it was you all along." Jesus smiled, opening the door of the eternal home he had prepared. "You multiplied what I gave you. Your work is finished. Come and rest." At dawn, Sarah passed away peacefully in her sleep, and as the Willow House bell tolled, the people of Hope Springs knew. The widow had finally gone to the last home Jesus Christ built with his own hands. In the years after Sarah's passing, the Willow House became more than a restored home. It became a living testimony, a place where thousands came to remember what Jesus Christ had done in a quiet Appalachian town. Pilgrims traveled from distant states just to stand on the porch where Sarah first held the key, to pray in the doorway Josh once crossed, or to sit in the attic room where Ethan found hope. Some left handwritten notes on the fence, stories of broken families, heavy burdens, or prayers whispered in desperation. Others left with renewed faith, convinced that if Jesus could walk into Hope Springs, he could walk into their lives too. Meanwhile, the Christ House of Hope Foundation grew beyond anything the town could have imagined. What started as a local mission built one home, then 10, then 100. Teams of volunteers, teachers, truck drivers, single moms, veterans joined hands to build miracle homes across the country. Every frame raised, every roof installed, every door swung open carried the same message. Jesus hasn't stopped building. He's still moving through willing hands. Ethan, now an adult with a steady voice and the same compassion Sarah once showed him, often stood before new homeowners and said, "This isn't charity, this is legacy. It began with Jesus Christ. Sarah carried it. Now it's ours." And the legacy didn't end there. Children who grew up in those homes became builders themselves, engineers, social workers, pastors, each one shaped by a story that began with a mysterious carpenter who never aged and never asked for recognition. They told their children, "If you want to see Jesus, look for someone who builds hope where there is none." Over time, people realized the miracle of Hope Springs was never meant to stay in Hope Springs. It was a call, a challenge, an invitation. Because the question was never, who was Josh Carter? The question was, and still is, who will you be? Will you walk past the hurting, or will you step into their story and let Jesus work through you? And to everyone listening now, this story is more than a tale. It's an open door. Jesus Christ is still building lives, still restoring hearts, still calling ordinary people to partner with him in extraordinary ways. If this story moved you, if you believe the world needs more hope, more compassion, more Jesus, subscribe to Jesus Christ Encounters, like this video, and join us as we share real modern-day miracles that remind the world. Jesus is alive, Jesus is working, and the next miracle might begin with you.